Hey guys, Zomfox here, and today it is time to talk about how well did Adrian Martinez and Luis Perez do in the first week of the 2024 NFL preseason. Now, for those of you who don't know, both these guys played in the United Football League this past season in spring football, and both of them were really good, the two best QBs in the league. And they both were able to parlay that into another NFL opportunity, and well, they just played their first preseason game of the season, and so it's time to look at how well they did. Now, if you're here just for the recaps of one or both quarterbacks, without any of the UFL stuff, I'll have timestamps down below to each quarterback, Adrian Martinez being first and Luis Perez next. But before we get into that, of course it's important to note why this is such a big deal for the UFL. Now, spring football has produced some high-end talent since the post-COVID era, that being the USFL, XFL 3.0, and UFL. Of course, guys like Brandon Aubrey, Cavante Turpin, and Daniel Whalen have all been very good too. In Aubrey's case, the best player in their position in the NFL, but they are all special teams players. And while I've seen some defensive players stick around on active rosters, we haven't seen a QB from any of these ultra-modern leagues actually kind of become a legit backup. So it's of course important to see one of these two guys, either that being the UFL MVP himself, Adrian Martinez, or the league leader in passing yards, Luis Perez, actually pull it off. So without further ado, let's get started with Adrian Martinez. Now, before we go into look at some of the highlights and exactly what he did really well, when you look at his pure stats, you'll see that he was actually pretty solid. He wasn't incredible stat-wise in accuracy, being only 6 for 10, but 104 yards passing, led the entire game in passing yards, which is very impressive. And he did have 2 rushes for 24 yards on the ground, which is also impressive. And the team did win the game, as he played as the second-half QB. Now, while the stats are good, what's really impressive is exactly how he got those stats. Now, as for the rushing stats, he had 2 rushes on third downs, which both got first downs, which was something he did very well in the UFL. So it's very impressive seeing him continue to do that. Being able to use his legs to get first downs on third down is huge. What was most impressive was, of course, his passing mainly to Brandon Smith, another former UFL player who played in the Defenders. He had not one, but 2 highlight plays to Brandon Smith, including a super deep shot, and then his next one being, of course, what many called the highlight of the game, where a scrambling Martinez threw it to a diving Smith. The fact is, both those plays were really impressive and were stuff that he was doing in the UFL. So when you look at all of his highlights and exactly what he did, what I'm seeing is him being able to continue what he did in the UFL against NFL lower stringers. Now, yes, this was mainly, against third, fourth stringers because of when he came in, but the fact is that it's still a step up in competition than what he was going against in the UFL. And seeing him continue to do what he did in the UFL against these third and fourth stringers gives a lot of hope that he could potentially keep going. Now, the biggest issue, though, with Martinez is the fact that he is really competing for QB4 on the roster. Right now, the Jets have 5 QBs. Now, it's really between Andrew Peasley and Adrian Martinez for that 4th spot. That's because they have Aaron Rodgers as the starter, Tyrod as the backup, and it's very obvious that when healthy, Jordan Travis is probably going to be put in as the QB3. So that does mean he's competing for a practice squad job. But from game 1, he did definitely take the edge. He had a much better game than Andrew Peasley. Many people agree that he was the star of that game across both teams, at least in the quarterback realm. So when you look at what he did, it's very impressive and definitely gives a lot of hope to Adrian Martinez fans and Birmingham Stallions fans, Jets fans, everyone, that he could be a legitimately solid QB4. Now the thing is, of course, number 1, when will Jordan Travis come back from injury? We don't know for sure. He had a very bad knee injury at the end of the last college football season, and as you know, sometimes they take, like 8 months to heal, sometimes they take a full year. So it's very possible he could still be out for decent parts of the season, meaning Martinez could be QB3. And while you want to knock on wood, both Tyrod Taylor and Aaron Rodgers have an injury history. It is very possible that one or both of them could get hurt as well. So there is a possibility that if Adrian Martinez just beats Peasley, he could end up starting a game in a few weeks if things fall his way, which hopefully don't happen because we do want to see what Aaron Rodgers and the Jets could do. But it's important to note that for the Jets, being a QB4 really isn't that bad a thing when you're talking about a guy who's currently hurt and then 2 guys who could be hurt. So it is impressive to see what Martinez did, and it is important for him to try and win that job. As even a practice squad job will pay him a lot more money than he was making in the UFL, and it will show that it did work. So we'll have to see. But overall, very solid game for Martinez, definitely a good one. Now, as for Luis Perez, this is where it gets sadly a bit of the opposite realm. Now, statistically, Perez didn't do all that great, but he still technically was the best QB really of all of them, aside from Max Duggan arguably stat-wise. His 5 of 12 for 61 passing yards was actually the most passing yards in the team, but 5 of 12 is a pretty poor stat line. Max Duggan was 4 of 7 for 41 yards, but at 38 on the ground, or 15 on the ground. So, I mean, the easiest way to tell is that no QB really played that well. The fact is there was really only one highlight play that Luis Perez had, and that was that really good bomb to Jalen Johnson, which was a very impressive pass. It was a great deep throw. That was a perfect throw. But aside from that highlight, there really wasn't anything to write home about with Luis Perez. It wasn't like Martinez, who led his team to a game-winning drive to win the game. Perez came in at the end of the game and didn't play all that well. Now, the thing with Perez is it's both a benefit and a hurt, or I guess a con compared to Martinez. Perez is legitimately competing for the QB2 job. The QB2 job is currently Easton Stick, which, yeah, that's beatable. Now, the other quarterback battle is, of course, with Max Duggan. So, odds are Perez will probably be, at worst, a practice squad guy, but for him, he's trying to get at least the QB3 job. Now, this is weak competition, and it showed in the game. Now, yes, what hurt Perez is that he didn't play all that well against lower string guys. But what did help him is that Easton Stick looked even worse against the twos. Easton Stick looked terrible. 5 of 13 for 31 yards and an interception is inexcusable. That's one of those stat lines you legitimately don't have to watch the game. If you see that stat line, you know that guy played terrible. And when you look at everyone, what they said online, you look at what the game replay, Easton Stick looked horrid. So that helps Perez and Duggan in a sense that they both, while they didn't either really look that good, they still looked better than Easton Stick. Now, again, is about the competition you played. If you play earlier in these games, you're playing slightly better competition. But at the end of the day, going from 2s to 3s to 4s is a much smaller difference than going from a 1s to a 2, right? When you're talking about your 1s to 2s, it's probably a bigger difference than your 2s to 4s in a sense of your strings. Because the starters are the elite talent. Then you have the backups who, they're backups for a reason. There's a few guys who are really good, but most of them are clear backups. And then third and fourth stringers, on any given day, some of those guys could easily swap. So in that regard, yes, it does hurt both Perez and Duggan. They didn't play all that well against third and fourth stringers. But when Easton Stick looked as bad as he did across the game, I mean, it does kind of help both their cases. So again, Perez has got the benefit that he is legitimately competing for a QB2 spot. He was brought into the team to be a competitor for that QB job because having just two quarterbacks battling for the second and third string really isn't a battle. So when you add Perez, you add some legit competition. Now, it's going to be interesting to see if he can continue what he was doing in the next game, if he ends up playing more, if he doesn't, whatever ends up happening. It'll be really interesting to see what happens there because, again, he didn't play all that well, but he did have really the highlight of the team that day with that throw to Jalen Johnson. So, we'll see. Overall, this has been Zom Fox. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. I am planning to continue doing these, off-season videos for the UFL off-season, I guess is the best way to put it. But talking about NFL preseason, NFL season, looking at how certain players are playing, continuing this journey in the preseason about Perez and Martinez, seeing how well they play and all that, as well as other stuff. Again, we've had some massive breaking news in the UFL. Of course, John DeFilippo resigning. I have a video out on that if you want to go check the channel. And as always, make sure to have a great night.